USC is coming into the Big Ten. That means I will get a chance to talk with more and speak more with my good friend Tony Knopp. My friend, don't talk enough. Welcome back.
Thank you. I look forward to it every time.
We're doing the timing of this is important because the Pac-12 is still in existence.
For now.
For now.
Maybe not by the time we're done with the interview. But,
we'll find out. I want to go back to September. And in September, it looked like a deal was close to being consummated with ESPN, and George Kliavkoff held off on it. Why, I don't know. Maybe you do. And since then, nothing. Where do things stand, if they stand at all?
I don't know. And I don't know if anybody knows. There's this idea that they can get some kind of deal done with an alliance with other conferences, the ACC, and hopefully guarantee big games every year. Right? That's the intent. Is like, hey, we're gonna match up the big stars. It's kind of like when the NFL first started. You know, the New York Giants played the Packers and the Bears 4 times each, and all 8 games were in New York. Right? It was just, hey, look, we've got to make some money. Yeah. And it's not fair, but it just is what it is. And that's never really changed. I mean, despite everybody's attempts to create parity, you know, as we've talked about in the past, you know, you have the major brands, and the major brands are the ones who drive the TV deals, and the TV deals are the ones who decide what we're watching and when. I don't think there's a deal on the table. I think the Pac-12 would have taken it by now because they are in a difficult situation with Colorado, who's pretty much made it clear that they're dating other people, right? And it's a really simple transition for them to go back to the Big 12, where Yormark has made very clear that they're open for business, and poaching Pac-12 teams is, you know, the business that they're looking to do. So, you know, we spoke about this in January and February, and I remember we said if they don't have a deal done by the end of March, this could get real dire real fast.
Yes.
And I think that's where we are. I think there's a legitimate concern of a major conference not existing in major college football.
All right, so let me ask you about the strategy publicly of George Kliavkoff. When the UCLA situation, now you and I both know it was not in doubt, no matter what anybody says.
No. That was all political politics.
It was all, yeah. In other words, a lot of blah, 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 and no substance. But he did a lot of talking then. Since December, he has done no talking. If you were advising him, would you advise him to get out there and at least talk a little bit? You know, because the longer this goes, it seems like no talk, no confidence.
I definitely see that train of thought, but maybe because he's quiet, something's coming. For example, like Rory all of a sudden got quiet.
Yes, he did. You're right. He did.
Right? Yep. And then boom. And it turns out that they've been talking for 7 weeks.
Yep.
Maybe there's something happening. Now, the belief on the LIV PGA side from the insiders that I know is that there were another 3 major players about to make the jump. And the PGA had to do a deal.
Right.
That might be what's happening with...
Right. And just so everybody knows, right? What forced the AFL-NFL merger? What forced the AFL-NFL merger in 1966 was Al Davis convinced 4 quarterbacks in the NFL to go to the AFL. And the NFL said, no, okay, we've got to do something.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same thing that moved the Boston Braves to Washington with Marshall, right? It's 100%.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I see as somebody who roots for the Pac-12, right? I grew up in Pac-10 territory. I'd like them to do well. Maybe, I mean, George historically has never been this quiet. So we worked with George when he was at MGM for a very long time. And he's always been out front. He's a front man. He's got the look. He plays the part. He's always out in the press. He's always, talking about what his company's doing and where they're going. And all of a sudden, silence. Which leads me to believe that maybe he's going to be the sacrificial lamb, but maybe a voluntary sacrificial lamb on this, which I'm a little surprised by Jay Monahan, too. I'm surprised that Jay Monahan didn't resign when they did this deal.
Agreed.
It seems like Greg Norman might have. He hasn't popped up in the last day. But maybe Kleopov is looking at this and saying, I can get a deal done. It's going to be a good enough deal, and then I'm going to walk, because he really got dealt a bad hand. I mean, he came in after Larry Scott just ruined a conference and pocketed $25 million along the way. So I don't know, to answer the question shortly, maybe his silence is because something is coming. My concern is Colorado's such public posturing leads me to believe that they have to be leaving, right? They have to be.
My understanding, and this is just maybe from 30,000 feet, the Pac-12, it wouldn't crush them if Colorado left because they could replace them with San Diego State, but Arizona leaving would be the crusher.
Can Arizona leave without Arizona State? I don't know that.
I don't know.
A lot of times those state schools are tied together.
Yeah, and that's the part I don't know.
I don't know
because I know that San Diego State's exit number from the Mountain West grows exponentially after June 30th.
Right.
And that's a big part of this. So I'll get back to that in a moment. I want that because there's some great stuff to talk about here, but you brought up LIV, and since you brought up LIV, let's go there for a moment. Does anybody know what golf will look like next year because of the merger? I mean, are players going to play maybe some tournaments in shorts? Are they going to play a couple of 54-hole events? Does anybody know?
No. We have dear friends that work there that were not made aware of it until after it was public, and still don't know what the plan is. What we've been told
privately,
next year.
Privately, are they angry about it?
No, the ones that I know that work there are not.
Okay.
The LIV people aren't. I mean, the PGA Tour was as vitriolic, if not more, behind closed doors than they were in public last year.
Ooh.
They were very. I mean, anybody who went to LIV was Judas and dead to them. And now all of a sudden, that's not the case. So they're jubilant about it, right? It couldn't have worked out better for them. But they don't know. They don't know. What I've been told is yesterday was the biggest sales day LIV has ever had, and that the plan is operating the rest of this season going to finish out. From there, the question comes down to, why would you want to go play in a non-guaranteed 72-hole tournament when you can go play 54 holes and get a guaranteed check in your shorts, right? It's just, look, as you know, you're a scholar of all the games, and I do my best to be one. You know, these changes aren't uncommon. People talk about the traditionalism in sports, but you know, people are always trying to make their sport more digestible by what the people want to see in that day. And that's, you know, like when football decided, you know, when the NFL was getting crushed in the 20s and 30s by college football, and they decided maybe we should try to play on Sunday, which at the time the Blue Laws didn't allow.
Right.
And you weren't allowed to play football on Sunday until the NFL had to lobby to change the rules, and then they changed rules to make it more of a high-scoring game. And so I think what's happening is just this natural evolution of golf as a game. And, you know, so here's my guess. This is just me talking based on what I've seen. I think the LIV events that have been successful will stick around. So Adelaide in Australia was a massive hit for them.
Yes, it was.
I think the PGA Tour looked at that and said the ratings numbers and the attendance numbers were fantastic. We're going to do more of that. I think DC was okay, but you already have a major tournament in the area for the PGA. I think this probably just becomes the international wing of the PGA Tour, right? So they haven't yet done. They've got London coming up. They did Mayakoba, which not a lot of people attended, but they have London coming up. They have Spain coming up, and a couple of others. If I had to guess, I think the LIV Tour becomes the international tour, you know, along with the DP Tour, and maybe in some of these higher paying events, you qualify for them, and it's a 54-hole no cut. But if you're Dustin Johnson, if you're Brooks Koepka, if you're one of these guys who still has game, why would you want to go back to playing 34 events a year when you could have played, you know, 14 and made more money?
Right. Well, no, I talked to a friend of mine who was one of the play-by-play announcers in the Big Ten, and he was telling me that he was covering a tournament in his area, so I'm not going to tell you where, but Koepka was in the tournament. And Koepka essentially admitted to him, he says, look, he says, I'm only playing here because I'm trying to tune up for the, you know, for the Open Championship. It's like,
yeah, oh yeah.
And he said he played that way. Like, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
But
and he's shown. I mean, he's the Kurt Flood of baseball. I mean, there's a very good chance, he's the Kurt Flood of golf. For the listeners who don't know who Kurt Flood is, he's the one who brought free agency to Major League Baseball.
Right.
He could be the one that creates the golfers union. He could be the one that, because of his actions, creates this scenario where golfers have more control over what they're doing. I mean, yes, the PGA Tour was screaming loyalty, not-for-profits, all these different, they were making it sound like they had the moral high ground across the board. But in the end, if you're not a highly paid player, you have no guarantees on the PGA Tour. I mean, your career could go the way of Mike Weir quickly, right? And next thing you know, you're at the top of the game, and then you're not qualifying anymore. I mean, David Duval has a 59, and at one point played the challenge against Tiger Woods, and then he disappeared 2 years later, and there was no guarantees for him. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be some kind of in between where you create this kind of legacy for golfers, and it makes more sense, right? And you always have the U.S. Open Championship, which is the true Open where everybody can qualify, and I think that what it comes down to here is money and the law. So this is very similar to, we don't talk politics on this show often, but the Dominion case with Fox News, which essentially got settled right before they were going to depose Rupert Murdoch.
Exactly.
Right? He wasn't going on the stand.
Like, what,
nobody on either.
$790 million or something like that.
Yeah, to keep him off the stand. There is no way these golfers and the Saudi royal prince was ever going to show up and get deposed on the stand. Right? This comes down to the lawsuits and cleaning those up. And money, and like you said, the Al Davis approach of they had 4 major players moving over to the AFL, and I've been told that there were 3 more major PGA Tour players moving over to LIV Golf.
Well, number one, I know there's a massive concern about the Saudi money. I understand that. But they're being given guaranteed numbers.
Yeah.
Right? That set themselves up for life. Koepka will tell you that when he made the move, he was injured.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's
really injured.
Right. I mean, really injured. Yeah. And so he kind of looked around and said, well, this is a way where I get guaranteed money. And so it's sitting there. And so he ended up taking it. And I mean, that's something that's going to happen with the PGA Tour. They're going to get an influx of cash, and it may not be where the fans want it from, but it's cash.
It got to be difficult for the PGA Tour to defend it in the sense that they run a tour in China.
Yes,
that's and
right.
They have 23 of their 27 major sponsors do significant business with the Royal Fund in Saudi Arabia. So it was growing difficult for them to say, well, we're only a little bit pregnant. And they're all the way pregnant, right? And it seemed like the social understanding of that was the tide was turning. That like, well, we know this money, we might think that this money is evil, but you have it too. And that's what we were talking about with George and Larry and Jay Monahan, is that I'm shocked that Jay Monahan hasn't stepped down. Right? You just, what integrity do you have left? But then again, who knows these days? Just the idea that you can be that prominent on one side in taking a stance, and then just all of a sudden, as Rich Eisen said it well yesterday, that it's terrible atrocities, and then you get a paycheck, and it's, well, what atrocities?
Right?
Who knew? Right? So this is amazing. It's funny how we just don't think things can change so significantly, and then the next thing we know, the Big Ten has USC, UCLA, Rutgers, and Maryland.
Right.
We don't think that Texas and Oklahoma are ever going to go to the SEC. Right. We don't think that there's ever going to be a European Super League in soccer, but the Premier League did it, and not that long ago.
Right.
It's just there's so much more change and so much more disruption in front of us than we see, and it happens so fast, right? You just don't see it coming, and the next thing you know, competitive golf shows up, and now Saudi Arabia owns golf, right? And Colin Cowherd made an interesting point yesterday where he said everybody's up in arms about this, but Saudi Arabia essentially owns the European Premier League, right, or the English Premier League right
now. That's right, exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. But you know what? There's another element, too, to this that is not often discussed, and that's the fans. We just watched the Masters and the PGA, and Brooks Koepka has played, of the 8 rounds of the majors, the 7 best rounds out of 8.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. Final round of the Masters, no. John Rahm was better.
Yep.
And the fans were thrilled to see Dustin Johnson there. They were thrilled to see DeChambeau hit the ball 350. They were thrilled to see Mickelson make a run at the Masters. These are all LIV players.
Mm-hmm.
They only want to see the best players out there. They don't care about the politics. Is that fair in your mind?
Yes, that's sports in general. I think what makes sports so appealing to all of us is the idea that we can have a shared experience and that we can watch people do things that are just astounding, right? To watch Serena win 23 majors, to watch Federer do what he does, to watch Messi do what he does. I mean, Messi's going to come over to MLS and change everything. He's one of the. It's just the idea that we want to see greatness, right? And it's difficult if that greatness is wrapped up in a lot of other things, but that's just been life since Muhammad Ali made it so.
Yeah.
Right. And good for him. And I think people just want to see the best in one place, and in the end, they don't care. Honestly, like I take a lot of heat from my friends when I say I've actually watched a LIV tournament, and I like the setup better. Mm-hmm. I like it better that they're all out on the course at the same time. Yeah. That the leader's not in the clubhouse waiting to see if he wins or loses. I like it better that it's okay. We're all playing at once.
Right.
But up to change as we are. Like I'm not sure everybody at USC is going to love playing at in Happy Valley in December.
No.
Right.
Right.
But that's just going to become the norm eventually, and that's just, the way it is. I mean, it was, back in the day, nobody wanted to play all the way out west at Michigan, right?
Right, that's right.
Now that's flipped the other direction.
Yeah, well, exactly.
It comes down to the fact that the PGA Tour was probably going to lose more stars. The public was more accepting of LIV. The numbers on sales, the ratings never went up for LIV, but the sales numbers did, and the events were starting to become more legitimate, and it was a matter of time before this lawsuit got in the way, and everybody had to air their dirty laundry, and they didn't want to do that. They'd pay whatever they could to not let that happen. That's why you and I haven't been talking about John Gruden much,
right?
Right? Yeah. There's a reason, because if that goes far enough, Goodell and the owners are going to be on the stand, and they will pay anything they can pay
to stay off
the
stand.
Right?
Yes. I mean, that
John Gruden just all of a sudden got quiet. You think you got a bag?
I mean, let's face it. You're sitting there in a deposition. Okay, now you get to ask all the questions you want.
All of them. Mm-hmm.
And guess what?
I've been in them.
And eventually, people find out what's in the deposition.
Yeah, it's public, right? I've been deposed. It's unpleasant. It's 8 hours with a camera in your face, right? And you legally have to disclose everything you do, which for me is not a bad thing. I tend to follow the straight and narrow. But for others, look.
In the transcript, did they spell my name right? No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. They're going to do everything they can to stay off that stand. Just like the NFL is going to do everything they can to stay off the stand. There's no way they're putting the Davis family on the stand with Gruden. The NFL, with how much money they're making right now, I mean, Goodell's getting re-upped at $60 million a year?
Yeah. Exactly
it's
right.
Incredible.
It'll be his last. Million. It'll be his last contract too.
Yeah, Joe Carr made like $1,000 for being the original commissioner,
sitting in the auto showroom in Canton,
working a side job. George Hallis is having to win up in Saratoga Springs just to make payroll, and now here we are. Right, like everybody stay quiet. So I think that's what happened there. And again, I think that makes a good point to you about what we were talking about with George K. Right, somebody who has been very vocal his entire life is all of a sudden quiet. John Gruden has not been a quiet individual for the last 20 years. Have you heard anything from him?
Nope. I mean, he has said nothing.
But he hasn't said boo, and he's not going to.
Yeah. Right.
And that's what's happening with the PGA and the LIV Golf. Everybody's just going to stay quiet, take their money. Yes, sir. Right. And they're going to move along to what's next. And I think it'll be interesting. I mean, look, you feel bad as you can feel for multi-millionaire golfers, for the guys who turned down the money, right? John Rahm and Hideki Matsui turned down, from what I hear, $600-700 million. Or not Matsuyama.
Yeah, Matsuyama.
I mean, that's not life-changing money. That's family-changing money for generations, right? And he turned it down, and now he's not going to get anything.
Yeah. Welcome back. Tony Knopp rejoins us. And Tony, we'll get to a couple of other issues in a moment, but we always relate this to European soccer at some point, because you and I are big believers in history and examples And to their credit, they have been forward thinkers. What are some lessons that we can take financially and thought process wise from European soccer, from the continent, that may start to apply to sports here because it is forward thinking?
Yeah, what's interesting about European soccer is they were willing to blow up a lot of tradition. I mean, what gets lost along the way is in 1994-95, when the first 5 clubs built the English Premier League.
That's right.
They weren't showing games on TV because they were worried it was going to hurt ticket sales.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they finally did do a TV deal, Arsenal pushed back and said you can't show the first half because then people won't come to the game. Turns out the TV sales is where all the money was. They did a really good job of making sure that they took care of the development of the clubs that were around them, but they knew that the moneymakers were the moneymakers. And that's what we were talking about a second ago. You know, the NFL essentially became the NFL because of Green Bay, New York, and Chicago.
That's right.
And they knew it. And so Hallis and Mara and, you know, Lambeau and all the owners, they got together and they understood that we need to put the games where people are going to go. And that may not be fair, but what we need to do is build on the mega brands. And so European soccer did that. European soccer said, okay, our mega brands are Arsenal, United, Liverpool, you know, Everton, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the way that they revenue share, if you look at the way that parity works, if you look at the way that they pay players and that they have loans, it's not fair. It's not level, right? And you create more money across the continent by doing that. I think we're hitting a little bit of a tipping point with that, with the North American sports, especially with the college institutions, right? I think that everybody now realizes that the conferences are driven by the mega players, that the Big Ten's driven by Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, soon to be USC.
Yes.
That, you know, the SEC has their mega brands. Alabama needs to be good. The NFL, as much as they'll talk about, hey, we have parity, we have different people in the Super Bowl all the time, you know, that sport is driven by the mega brands. It's driven by the mega teams. And a lot of people will say, well, Green Bay is a small town. So were all of them, right? The Philadelphia Eagles were originally they were the Yellow Jackets. And they were somewhere
Frankfurt Yellow Jackets.
Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it all comes from. They start to realize that, okay, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets playing against Duluth, isn't going to work. We need to move them to big cities. So they do, right? Marshall realizes it's not going to work in Boston, so he goes to D.C., and then Boston comes back 20 years later.
Right.
That's what I think we're going to see is more I think we're going to see more examples like what's happening with City Football Club, like what's happening with Liverpool, like what's happening with these conglomerates who are placing teams in other markets and building these national brands. Mm-hmm. F1 is the same way, right? And you have, you know, City Football that now has Manchester City. They also have New York City FC. They also have the top team in Australia. They have a team in Belgium. They have a team, and I think that's where we're going to see it. It's just going to be interesting whether that's going to come, where that money is going to come from, because right now there's really 2 paths that are pushing it. Private equity, which in the past few years the rules have changed in sports that private equity is now allowed to buy stakes in teams in North America. That has not been the case in the past, but they have been buying teams in Europe for quite a while. Or is it going to be the media players? You know what, we're just going to own this. And right now you're saying, you know, ESPN is the kingmaker when it comes to college football, right? They just are. Mm-hmm. And if Disney, ESPN decide the Pac-12 gets to exist, they do. At what point do they take an ownership stake like what Apple did with MLS and create an environment where Messi comes? So the way they built the Premier League and then what they do to continue it it's a very different model than the North American model. And it's really served player movement over there better than it has here. Because here we keep running into the problem where you have a player that is in a market they don't want to be in. They've got a guaranteed contract, a supermax deal, and they just say, I'm just not going to play. I'll see you later. And there's not really a lot we can do about that, right? Somebody forces their way out of town like Anthony Davis did or the like. There's just a lot more motion for that in Europe. They have transfer windows across leagues. They have the ability to make changes. I think we're going to see some more of us. And it's interesting because the European Premier League, the English Premier League ripped off the NFL. I think there's going to be more us ripping them off because they just had more success.
Obviously, fans, when they looked at the contract, they realized that, wait a minute, there are going to be 8 games in the Big Ten on Peacock football, and there'll be
Yep.
37 in basketball. And and you and I can guess that with the addition of USC and UCLA, there'll be more. How do you view streaming versus over the air? And then I want to get to the regional sports network problem.
Here's the regional sports network is oh man.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute.
Here's the issue with streaming that I don't know if people understand. And I'll draw an analogy to what's happened in other businesses. So, up until Google indexed the internet and followed HTML links so that I know what's out there, it was a broad game to advertise, right? I'm buying billboards, I'm buying signage, and then all of a sudden Google showed up and said, hey, I have a way to better understand the customer and to target them better. And everybody threw a little bit of money at that. And as that got more mature, those dollars increased significantly. And now we have the FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google.
Right.
And what makes all of those, what they all have in common is the data that they have on an individual user and how they can sell that data to somebody who's trying to sell, toilet paper or cereal or whatever to advertisers. Process in sports media of watching streaming create more understanding of viewership than what we've seen historically with broad-based media rights, right? Which has been Nielsen ratings, that sort of thing.
Right.
And it's creating more dollars. It's basically the FANG movement into disrupting the media game. Streaming rights right now, my guess is that they're really undervalued. And you and I have talked about that quite a bit, right?
That's right.
How the numbers that we're seeing for the streaming rights right now, we're going to look back on in 10 years the same way we look back. I think it's the 10-year anniversary now of Instagram being bought by Facebook. I think they bought it for $1 billion, and it did $48 billion or something. I don't know, some crazy number.
Right.
I think we're going to look back and say the same thing, right? That, it's not as broad an audience, but it's a much more descriptive audience that people are willing to pay a lot more money for. And I think that's where we're eventually heading with cord cutting. I mean, look, you've got Bob Iger saying, we're going to unbundle ESPN, which was kind of the last bastion for the cable bundles, right? People are going to pay for live sports. And like we just said, these things happen so much faster than we anticipate. Could be 5 years, and we're all just streaming everything.
Well, regional sports networks, and especially this really hits hard at the NBA and really hits hard at baseball. Really hits hard. Baseball has built itself back into a $10 to $11 billion industry. This, to me, puts a dent in it because they're going to have to absorb some of this.
Mm-hmm. They want to, though.
Oh, I know they want to, and because now they'll have complete control. And control means something to them. How do you view the regional sports network problem and how Major League Baseball is trying to solve it?
So, it's a good friend of mine, Billy Chambers. He was at Fox Sports. He was actually one of our first customers at Ticket Manager in 2010. And he was the head guy at Fox Sports before it got sold into Sinclair. And, we've talked about this at length. We talked about it last year. I haven't spoken to him since last summer about this, but last summer he walked me through what was going to happen. It's exactly what's happened here. This is the opportunity for Rob Manfred to get an NFL-style TV deal.
Right.
And so what he's looking for is what's exactly happened. Minnesota was going to be the first domino to fall, and then Arizona, San Diego, and the like. And so they aired their first games for the Padres last week. It was a wild success. Everything went well for them. Now what they're looking for is eventually, so I'll try not to be too detailed for the listeners. Essentially what's happening is this is going to come down to a court case in Houston. And the Bally's/Sinclair, fans know them as Bally's. The Sinclair Broadcast Group owns the Bally's TV channels, the RSNs that are around the country. Sinclair is saying, look, these deals have changed significantly. We need bankruptcy protection so that we can change these deals and continue to do it. Major League Baseball is saying, no, we want out of the deals, and therefore we can claw back all of our rights, and we can create our own national deal. And they're going to have to deal with the Yes Network, and they've got some other things they're going to have to figure out to get there. But that's what Manfred's trying to do. Manfred's trying to create an NFL-style TV package that he can sell.
Well, I mean, that's what he's trying to create. See, what's happened is that Yes is incredibly successful.
Very successful.
Nesson's incredibly successful.
Yep.
Others have not been able to duplicate it,
but they're still trying.
They're trying.
I mean, Washington's about to try.
Right, Washington's about to try. Because I know with Sinclair, with the Twins, their deal was $60 million per year. When they went to renegotiate, because the deal's up after the season, they offered 54, and Sinclair knew that the Twins were going to say no to 54. I mean, this is calculated on both sides.
Yeah, they know exactly, and they knew that Minnesota was going to be the place where it was going to be ground zero for this. He told me this last summer. He said Minnesota is going to be where the domino falls, and then it's going to end up in court. It looks like that's going to be in Houston, and it's going to be a question of whether there's protection or not. Because if there's not, at some point, Sinclair is not going to continue to fight this battle. I mean, they've already gone in for reorganization. So, baseball is coming back and saying, look, we want to control the rights here. There are rights. You haven't lived up to your contract. That's that. And so the real question is, and it's a slippery slope, is the state government going to step in and say, no, you do have to honor this price?
Right. Well, here's my question to you, though. He wants to put together an NFL-style deal.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible? Because the NFL is the NFL, Major League Baseball is Major League Baseball.
You know what's funny about that is we keep talking about the history of football, so I'll throw this in for the listeners.
Yeah.
All of the original NFL teams were named after the local baseball team.
All
the baseball
of them.
Team was
bigger. The Steelers were the Pirates, as an example.
All of them.
Yep.
There was the Dodgers, the Pirates, the New York Giants, or the Giants is the New York Giants baseball team. It's so crazy how that's flipped in 80 years. Well, no, I guess 100 years. It's possible because from what I understand, once you reach a certain number of, what's the word I'm looking for when they don't live up to the contract, breach. Once you breach a certain number of teams, from what I understand, there's 11 teams that Major League Baseball can claw back. I think he said 4 teams. That if 4 teams breach, baseball can claw back the other 11, and now they have something like 20-something under control. And then it's just going to domino effect from there. I don't know the exact details of that, but that's what I was told, and that's what seems to be happening.
Mm. How well, if at all, do you know Brett Yormark, and what do you think of the strategy he has at the moment with the Big 12?
I know Brett. We ran a conference for our customers in 2014, and he was the keynote speaker. So I've known Brett a long time. That was before he went to Barclays Center, where he was for a while before he went to the Big 12.
Right.
Look, it's hard to tell how someone's doing in the moment. It seems like he's done a pretty phenomenal job.
Right.
He did that deal, and everybody thought, this seems aggressive, but now as the cards have played out, he's been in front of everybody, and now he's in a position where he's taken a conference that looked like it was going to dissolve and turned it into possibly the next power conference behind the Big Ten and the SEC, especially if he can pull the 4 corner schools, which he's trying to do, and Colorado, and then leverage this across multiple sports. Because what he's done a good job of is leveraging basketball.
Yes.
Right? He knows he's got a good basketball brand too, and he's just done a great job. And so far, it seems like it's working.
Yeah, I mean, he's openly talked about Gonzaga, which does draw more TV viewers for a regular season game than UCLA does. Mm-hmm. He's talked about UConn, which is interesting because UConn is not a Power 5 football program, but it's a Power 6 basketball program and the defending national champion. So that's what I find is interesting, is that he's not afraid to sit there and talk about that component. But let me ask you this, Tony, is it possible to be, as a conference, too big?
Yes, I think so. I think if you look at what's made the Premier League so strong is they refuse to expand it, right?
Yes.
They could. Absolutely. They could move down. Half the teams from the championship have been in the premiership in the last 5 years, right? I mean, Millwall, Norwich City, all those teams. You can look at them. They've all, QPR, teams that were up, 4, 5, 6 years ago They have the facilities to do it. They have the TV rights to do it, or the TV audience to do it. They have the fans to do it. But they do know that less is more, that it matters to be in the Premier League versus the championship. I do think that overexpansion waters down the brand. I think San Diego State is a massive mistake for the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about San Diego State.
I'm
right. Glad that they have a good basketball team right now, but they're not. I mean, UConn, you could argue that UConn is a blue blood basketball program.
No question.
I mean, they've won 5 titles?
Five titles.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can make an argument they're more of a blue blood than UCLA. UCLA hasn't won anything.
Right.
Since 1994, I think. So, too wide. I mean, would you make the argument that you think Maryland and Rutgers has been a success for the Big Ten?
I'll get back.
Do you think they do it again? Yeah, I'm not sure they do it again. Right?
In the only look, to me, what they bring to the table are the households for BTN, okay, which is a different tier. Okay, so that part, okay, I get it, but overall, nobody in the conference is excited about having them in.
No, nobody wants to go to those games.
Oh.
Like I said, my dear friend lives right up the street here. We know each other, Dave. You know him too. He goes to every he goes to every Penn State game for the last 30 years.
I know Dave.
Go to Rutgers.
Yep.
Right. Doesn't go to Rutgers.
That's right.
Right? It's nobody's excited about it, and people at Rutgers aren't excited about it. I think they've only sold out their stadium once in the last 20 years when they played Louisville.
Maryland averaged 31,000 fans last season.
Yeah, that's absurd. They're a basketball school.
Yeah.
And they're going to keep rolling out there. I mean, Stanford just gave up out here. Stanford took their 80,000 person stadium and cut it down to 30.
Yep.
They basically said, "Look, we're not an athletic institution anymore. We're going to put money into the Olympic sports, and that's it."
Right.
And yeah, I think when you start reaching for teams that don't fit that minimum, I think you water down your brand. I think UConn is definitely a good enough basketball program for the Big 12. Nobody cares about UConn football, and nobody in Oklahoma, Oklahoma State doesn't want to fly to UConn to play.
No.
They don't want to do it. The fans don't want to go.
No.
It's just not good business. And I think, like you said, if we're moving towards streaming, if we're moving towards more detailed information on the buyer themselves and on the fan themselves, a team like Gonzaga makes sense because Gonzaga is the only show in town in Spokane, and they have diehard fans. It's the same argument you can make for San Antonio. Why are the Spurs such a wonderful NBA franchise? Because even though they only have X amount of people in the local region, 80% of them are Spurs fans.
Right.
And spend all of their disposable income on the Spurs.
Right, exactly. And
so you can find those.
Right. And the final point, as there are certain brands out there that think they are big brands and don't understand that they are not. And I'm talking about Florida State, Clemson, to a point, Oregon and Washington's people. They think they're big brands, Tony, and there's a reality. They aren't.
They aren't. Nobody east of the Mississippi cares about Oregon at all, and they never are going to.
No.
Florida State's in a dangerous spot. I would actually conflate Florida State with Arizona. You have these programs that take off because a coach shows up, right? And Bobby Bowden made Florida State Florida State.
No doubt.
But he left, and they have not competed since, and they're in danger. And, Tennessee had that problem. They kind of came back in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But that's what's happened at some of these programs. And so you have Oregon. I'm not sure if it makes it out your way, but everybody in Oregon and Washington believes that, how dare the Big 12 or the Big 10 not call us? How dare they?
Right.
And the fact is, because if you go to a bar in New York City, nobody has the Oregon game on.
That's right.
Nobody has the Washington game on.
Yep.
They do have the USC game on.
Yep.
They do have the Penn State game on, right? There's a reason behind this, and that goes back, it ties together everything we're talking about. I want to see Brooks Koepka.
Yeah.
I don't care that you're trying to tell me that this other guy is as good as him. I know he's not. I want to see Brooks Koepka play against Justin Thomas.
Yeah.
I want to see Penn State USC. You keep trying to tell me that Penn State Oregon is as interesting. It's just not.
No. It's all
right.
About,
we know better.
Right. It's all about brand power means something. My friend.
It does.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this every time. It's the best.